All right, y'all. We are here. We are live. We get the other platforms going on here. So we got some updates going on about Iran. Sorry I'm late. I've just been trying to progressively find out where these carriers are at and everything. They went dark after they hit the Indian Ocean. But anyways, I got something for y'all to look at here. Catch ya.
President Trump is now giving a dire warning to Iranian leadership, writing on Truth Social this morning that a massive armada is heading towards Iran and is ready to, quote, fulfill its mission with speed and violence if necessary. Chief National.
Now, as you can see, where the carrier groups are and where the aircraft carrier groups are, we also have submarines there as well, as well as cruise missile ships and destroyers there as well.
Security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is tracking the latest for us on this. And Jennifer, it sounds like Iranian leaders are now responding with their own warning. What can you tell us?
That's right, Bill. In fact, the rhetoric is getting increasingly heated from the leaders in Iran. We have a statement from one of those leaders in which he said that any U.S. strike would be met with an immediate response, unprecedented, he described. We also heard from Iran's foreign minister that the armed forces in Iran have their fingers on the trigger, and the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei himself said that any illusion that any U.S. strikes would be limited is an illusion at that. The president, however, is deploying a clear carrot and stick strategy toward Iran. The USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier strike group is now in CENTCOM control with its 3 guided missile destroyers and dozens of combat aircraft, including stealth F-35 fighter jets and F-A-18 fighter jets, and literally hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of reaching Iranian targets. President Trump also offering an olive branch.
There's another beautiful armada floating beautifully toward Iran right now. So we'll see. I hope they make a deal. I hope they make a deal. They should have made a deal the first time they'd have a country.
The protests may have ebbed, but they will spark up again in the future because this regime, unless they are willing to change and or leave, have no way of addressing the legitimate and consistent complaints of the people of Iran who deserve better.
The U.S. Air Force is running regional military exercises this week to signal readiness. Officials see a real chance President Trump acts, but an equal chance Iran blinks.
He's setting the theater in a way that gives him lots of options in the near term and probably even for a little bit of a longer runway looking out into the future. So if tomorrow or a week from now or a month from now there were a strike on Iran by the United States or in concert with others, I wouldn't be a bit surprised.
I think if you are the Ayatollah and you look at the military buildup in the region, he has to wonder whether he will suffer the same fate as Maduro or something worse if he doesn't come to the negotiating table.
Iran's ambassador to the UN responded. Last time the U.S. blundered into wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, it squandered over $7 trillion and lost more than 7,000 American lives. Iran stands ready for dialogue based on mutual respect and interest, but if pushed, it will defend itself and respond like never before. Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, Bill said publicly it would not let anyone use its bases to attack Iran. Bill?
Yeah, at this point, Iran has to know the president is not bluffing. Jennifer Griffin, live here in Washington. Jen, thank you.
I'm Steve Doocy.
U.S. forces arriving in CENTCOM waters near Iran yesterday, holding multi-day military exercises. Should the White House decide to strike Tehran over the regime's deadly crackdown on civilian protesters? The president telling Axios, quote, "We have a big armada next to Iran, bigger than Venezuela. They want to make a deal. I know so. They called on numerous occasions. They want to talk." Now Iranian terror proxies in Yemen and Iraq are threatening an attack on American forces in the area. Joining me now, Heritage Foundation Vice President of National Security and former Deputy National Security Advisor to President.
I was wanting to know if they would attack one of the U.S. ships and actually have a successful hit on one of our ships. if they could actually do it. That would be a massive reaction. Like, I don't even think y'all understand how massive it would be. It wouldn't even, all guns would be off then, because they done killed U.S. sailors on. My bad, on neutral water. But yeah, it would be a big fireworks show. I'll tell you that, especially with Trump being in office.
Trump, Victoria Coates. Victoria, good morning. There's some new reporting this morning I wanted to ask you about. Basically, that Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the UAE are telling the United States that we cannot use their airspace if we decide to do any type of attack on Iran. Could you explain that to us?
Well, good morning, Cheryl. Good to be with you. Yes, I mean, this is pretty standard for the region. The Gulf powers will all say you can't use our airspace, you can't use your assets in our countries, and then we do. In the event the president wants to take an action against Iran. So, as I said, that's pretty much theater. They do it for face-saving reasons. That's fine. But the reality of the situation is the president has moved remarkable assets into the region, and it's really quite a demonstration of our ability to project power. Because bear in mind, a month ago, in the event the president types of assets were all concentrated in the Caribbean in the run-up to the action against Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. Now we're halfway around the world. We're prepared to do whatever the commander-in-chief might order. So we'll see what he decides to do going forward. But I do think the reporting on the number of casualties in Iran on the 8th and 9th of January, when more than 10,000 people, it appears, were killed, that may be the decisive point here.
Yeah, I want you to listen to retired General Jack Keane. He was on the program with me yesterday. And my question to him from a military perspective was how would this take place if the United States takes action against Iran? Listen to what Jack Keane told me yesterday.
I think what this is really about is holding the regime accountable, as you indicated, for the thousands that have been killed. And also the tens of thousands that have been in prison. And the president said he would do just that. And I think it's also about trying to cut off the head of the snake here. In other words, the regime is the snake, and we're trying to get the leaders out of there so some kind of transition can take place. Just the threat of this happening has to be weakening the resolve of the leaders around the Ayatollah. They are weak politically, economically, and militarily, and really on the cusp of not being even able to recover any of this because of the economic situation in such poor shape militarily.
Victoria, Iran is destabilized.
No, it is. And I mean, Cheryl, their central bank printed 2 quadrillion rial earlier this week to try to stabilize their economic situation. Quadrillion with a Q. And so if you're printing that much money, it means you can't solve your economic problems. They're in a death spiral. And that's what's different this time. I completely agree with General Keane. I mean, this isn't a single incident that's prompting the protests and the unrest in Iran. This is a systemic economic failure. And it's ridiculous. I mean, bear in mind, they have the second largest proven oil reserves in the world. And this is what's happening to them. That's how bad the mismanagement is. That's what the Iranian people are completely fed up with. So we'll see. I mean, the president has lots of options on the table. This isn't an invasion like Iraq or Afghanistan. This could be a very targeted strike on leadership or on infrastructure that would push the situation over the edge.
Yeah, that's why we see the reports that Khomeini is now back in his bunker. He's aware of that. I want to move on to this from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He's going to testify on Capitol Hill today over the Trump administration's actions in Venezuela and the capture of Maduro. Now, the White House is considering a naval blockade on Cuba to stop oil imports into that country. President Trump commented on this when he was in Iowa yesterday. Watch this.
We're going to see what happens with Cuba. I don't know, anybody interested in Cuba in this room? Not too many people. This is not a Cuba room, but that's all right. There are plenty of them around, especially in Miami. And Cuba will be failing. Cuba is really a nation that's very close to failing.
We're talking about
You know, they got their money from Venezuela. They got the oil from Venezuela. They're not getting that anymore.
Victoria, your thoughts on what we're going to hear from the Secretary of State today?
Well, obviously, this is a subject that's very close to Secretary Rubio's heart. His parents came from Cuba, and so he's been watching the island very carefully. Bear in mind, it's only 90 miles off the shores of Florida, so this is a much more proximate threat to the United States. It's been a deadly enemy of the United States for more than 60 years. It would be great to see positive change in Cuba, and I think that we could see that through economic means, through this oil embargo. They're also out of money, and they're out of fuel, and so we'll see what happens. But the good thing, and that I think this is what the president was talking about, is we have the extraordinary diaspora in the United States, starting with the Secretary of State, who are prepared to help Cuba in a very positive transition to be
US President Donald Trump has warned Iran that time is running out over nuclear talks, saying that the next attack will be far worse. This follows the arrival of the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier and other warships to the region. The convoy was deployed from the South China Sea to the Arabian Sea. Fighter jets are positioned in the region as well. Trump also announced that another US military fleet is on its way to Iran.
There's another beautiful armada floating beautifully toward Iran right now. So we'll see. I hope they make a deal. I hope they make a deal. They should have made a deal the first time they'd have a country.
All right, let's talk about this with Meir Javandamfar, an Iranian-Israeli lecturer and author. He's teaching Iranian politics at Reichman University in Israel. Welcome to DW. We heard Donald Trump there saying that a massive armada is heading to Iran. What is your take on his statement there?
Well, I think this is a very strong pressure tactic by President Trump to get the Iranians to agree to his demands. Now, what his demands are, some people believe that he wants the Iranian regime to stop killing the Iranian protesters, while others believe that his demands are for a new nuclear deal that is far more encompassing and far more comprehensive than the one that he walked out of in May 2018. Meaning that unlike that deal, which was originally reached with President Obama in July 2015, this time President Trump will probably demand zero enrichment on Iranian soil, the complete dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program and Iran's missile program. Now, these are different views. None of these have been confirmed. What we know from the Iranian side is that they say that there are a number of countries that are trying to mediate between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Trump administration. They say that we're not in direct talks with the Americans, but there are a number of countries that are trying to mediate. I think chief among them is Turkey. The Turks are very concerned about an America-Iran war. They're worried about a new wave of Iranian asylum seekers going to Turkey, joining already a large number. And it seems that they are heading the diplomatic front. Also, I think another country that is involved is Qatar. The Qataris are also transferring messages between the two sides.
Whatever Trump is heading for here, we're hearing from the Iranian foreign minister that negotiations can't take place under threats. So what do you think is the most likely scenario now? How might this play out, do you think?
Well, Anya, conventionally speaking and looking at the way President Trump behaves and his strategies, I think he's not going to back down on this. It seems that he's really zeroing in on the Iranians. He's not going to let up. I think the minimum is keeping pressure on the Iranians, and maximum he could attack them. by this time next week or in 2 weeks' time, we could be in the middle of or soon after a military strike by the Americans. And from what we hear from Iran, from the protesters, they would back such an attack against the rulers of the Islamic Republic because of the unprecedented cruelty shown by the Islamic Republic security forces towards Iranian protests. We're looking at numbers that are unprecedented, numbers of killed, that are unprecedented in contemporary Iranian history. So there is a lot of support for an attack by a foreign government, namely probably America, if not Israel, against the Islamic Republic for what they've done to the protests. So this puts President Trump under a lot of pressure because he called on the Iranians to come onto the streets. So if he ends up doing nothing, and without, that's going to tarnish his image. So I think the least he's going to settle for is a new nuclear deal, something that is far more outreaching. If not, I think he's not going to, if the Iranians are not willing to give him that, he's not going to walk away without a war, because he would come out of the latest confrontation with the Islamic Republic as a loser inside Iran and outside the United States. I would like to conclude by saying that let's not forget this year there's going to be midterm elections in the United States. Mm-hmm. So President Trump will want to avoid any scenario that weakens his chances.
Dr. Meir Javadanfar, Iranian-Israeli lecturer, author and commentator at Reichman University in Israel. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, for more now, I'm joined by Bradley Bowman. He's with the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Brad, it's good to see you again. Good to have you with us. What do you expect to happen in the next few days, particularly after we heard what the president said there?
Thanks for the opportunity to join you again. The president is clearly doing what Ronald Reagan's old Secretary of State George Shultz said, and that is cast the shadow of power over the bargaining table. And my goodness, what a shadow of power this is. This is the Abraham Carrier Strike Group, which has dozens of fighter jets, F-35s and F-18s, electronic warfare aircraft, helicopters, accompanied by a few destroyers, some destroyers already in the region, in addition to U.S. Air Force aircraft, including F-15s. This is an extraordinary array of combat power. President Trump is clearly trying to use that combat power to get the regime in Iran to come in good faith to the negotiating table. The problem is the negotiating table is where the regime, in my view, has been the strongest, and Washington has been the weakest, and America has been most likely to be duped.
On his Truth Social platform, the president posted, and earlier today, a massive armada is heading to Iran. And further on, he says it's like with Venezuela. It is ready, willing, and able to rapidly fulfill its mission with speed and violence if necessary. So, Brad, when you see that posted by the president, I mean, what do you think is the likelihood that we're going to see something happen in Iran, in Tehran, similar to what we saw in Caracas, Venezuela, with Nicolas Maduro?
Well, obviously, military, as your question implies, military operations against Iran would be quite different than what we saw in Venezuela, which was extraordinary but unique, but unlike what we'd see in Iran. There's important context here. The context is that the president warned the regime not to hurt the protesters. Mm-hmm. And then the regime proceeded to murder/kill thousands of protesters. So they heard the president's red line and warning, they shrugged, and they proceeded to blow him off. I've been doing this U.S. foreign policy thing for a while, and I advise against red lines and warnings as a general rule, because if you don't back them up, you hurt your own credibility and you start to get more bad behavior that requires action. So the president has issued the red line, not a bad red line, don't hurt the innocent protesters who simply want a government that stops murdering them. But now that he's issued it, he better back it up. He better back it up in some form. And so I think he's going to feel both policy and political pressure to make sure that he's not viewed as all talk.
Yeah, and I'm sure, Brad, that his advisors must be telling him, you don't want to be another Jimmy Carter. We know what happened with President Carter when he sent helicopters in to rescue the American hostages in Iran. It was a disaster. He doesn't want that to happen on his watch, does he?
He doesn't, but the comparison breaks down a little bit because the U.S. military is far more capable and ready now than it was during that period because of, I don't know, the Reagan buildup and defense spending, and that was on full display in Venezuela. No other military could have done that, and no other military in the world can do what we're currently assembling in the Middle East. That doesn't mean things can go wrong, won't go wrong, and do go wrong, but the Carter analogies break down a little bit. In the short here, let's remember, it's not just about Iran's nuclear program. We don't want the world's worst state sponsor of terrorism to acquire the most dangerous weapon, of course, but that's not enough. We also need them to end their systematic support for terrorism as the leading source of terrorism in the Middle East and leading state sponsor of terrorism, and we need to address their ballistic missile program. And if you think that Iran's going to agree to ending their pursuit progress toward a nuclear weapons program, they're going to stop their support for terrorism, and they're going to stop their ballistic missile program and stop persecuting the Iranian people, I got a bridge to sell you because it would require them to be something that they're not. That's why the negotiating table is such dangerous ground for the United States of America, because they will dupe us and get us to agree to a deal that is contrary to regional American and European interests. And we will not have a better future in a more stable Middle East, I predict, with confidence, until the Iranian people finally have a government that's interested in their welfare rather than the export of terrorism.
Let me get your reaction to what we've been seeing from Iran. They have reacted to President Trump's post. Also on social media, the Iran mission to the UN wrote the following: Iran stands ready for dialogue based on mutual respect and interest, but if pushed, it will defend itself and respond like never before. Brett, what options, if any, does the regime in Tehran have?
The regime has options, most of which they did not exercise during the 12-day war for a variety of reasons we can talk about. They launched roughly a dozen missiles at LUD, our base in Qatar, which we shot down. But nonetheless, they were trying to kill people there. They have a degraded terror proxy network. Hezbollah is degraded. Hamas is degraded, but you got the militias in Iraq, you got the Houthis in Yemen. They can conduct a variety of attacks on our embassies and consulates. They could, if I had to guess, I would say they're going to do more this time than they did during the 12-day war, because they will perceive that this time it's existential. It's the survival of the regime. And so if they have any tools, I would be surprised if they don't play them. They're trying to scare us into not doing what the president's warnings require. And we should not take those warnings lightly. That's why the Pentagon has been wise to be sending in all kinds of air and missile defense systems. Prudence requires us to expect that a lot of our bases would come under attack. Possibly we want to be prepared, but the president should be making clear that if you do that, it's going to be even worse for you, and they will only respect and fear strength. And if they think we're all talk, we're simply going to get more aggression.
All right, clear analysis tonight from Brad Bowman. Brad, as always, we appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm joined now by Michael O'Hanlon. He's with the Brookings Institution, where he specializes in U.S. defense strategy and the use of military force. Michael, it's good to have you with us. President Trump telling Iran to make a nuclear deal or else. I mean, is this new U.S. military buildup in the Middle East, is it really about Iran's nuclear program?
Greetings. Well, it is starting to feel that way, because after the previous discussion about whether military force could be employed to prevent Iran from massacring its own citizens, and specifically perhaps even hanging a lot of them, something that I think really repulsed President Trump, and rightly so, President Trump realized, I'm assuming, that there was really no good way to employ military force to protect a population from its own security forces. That's just historically not something we've done very successfully, whether it was, in Kosovo or whether it was in some other conflict in the past. Usually you need some presence on the ground, or you need to punish the regime so much that it cries uncle. But the Iranian regime has already proven it's not apt to do that. So it's starting to feel like, with this new set of deployments to the Middle East, that President Trump is trying to force a nuclear deal. And we'll see what happens. I'm doubtful that he can get it with this method, but he's sort of on, in his own mind at least, sort of on a roll with the Venezuela operations and the strike from last June. And maybe he's becoming confident that he knows how to use military force in this very selective and targeted way to get good results. I'm wary, but we'll have to see what happens.
I wonder if you think that we're watching a president who's engaging in a little bit of revisionist history here. I mean, last year in June, the U.S. attacked 3 nuclear facilities in Iran. At the time, Trump said that Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities had been obliterated. Is he now essentially admitting that those strikes were not as successful as he claimed?
Yeah, I think that word was always an unfortunate word. And of course, the administration doubled down when it was challenged because President Trump doesn't like to admit he's wrong, at least not directly. He'll sometimes back off of an idea, but he doesn't usually like to come out and say he was just flat out wrong, given his personality. And so I think in that regard, what we're seeing is a recognition that some nuclear capability survived. Probably most of the highly enriched uranium survived. And moreover, Iran's now had 6, 7, 8 months to start to rebuild things. By the way, even if Trump says he's attacking nuclear facilities or that he's concerned about them, it doesn't mean they'll be his target. He could choose to go after leadership. And it could be, again, more of a punishment strike than a direct physical deterioration of remaining Iranian nuclear facilities. So that's another possible interpretation or option for the president.
Yeah, you're reading my mind there. I mean, I was about to ask you, what do you think the possible targets could be if the U.S. does carry out new strikes on Iran?
Well, certainly the supreme leader is one possibility. He is believed to have spent most of last June in a bunker, knowing full well what was happening to some of his subordinates, especially who were in the military and nuclear chains of command, as Israel carried out its 20 days or so of airstrikes. And I think that one possibility, President Trump reportedly discouraged Prime Minister Netanyahu from going after the supreme leader last spring, but Trump may have reassessed. There may also be other political and security force leadership that he would target. And there could also be conventional military capabilities. Many of them have already been damaged, of course, by Israel. But for example, Trump could go after the shadow fleet of oil tankers that has been transporting Iranian oil in violation of sanctions. Now, that's, of course, fraught business when you're trying not to destroy the Persian Gulf's ecosystem. But you never know what Trump would be willing to do at this point.
I'm wondering, too, shades of Venezuela here, how likely is some kind of audacious operation like what we saw in Caracas against Nicolas Maduro, where you've got elite U.S. forces flying in and out within hours and taking a leader with them?
Well, I doubt it, because you mentioned the echo of Venezuela. Most Americans will remember also the echo of the failed Iran hostage rescue mission in 1980, at least those of us old enough to remember. And many of President Trump's advisors will surely remember. Tehran is just too far inland, and there's too many things that can go wrong. You probably recall that even with the Venezuela operation, we had one helicopter that was damaged, and we were fortunate to get it back. With the bin Laden raid in 2011, we lost one of the 2 helicopters, and that was a deep inland mission. And some of the operations we carried out against ISIS leadership in Iraq and Syria also involved aircraft, but generally from bases that were 50 or 100 kilometers away, maybe 200 kilometers at most, over terrain that we largely controlled. And so I think this is just going to be too hard to go in and do a snatch and grab of that kind of nature. I could be proven wrong, but my better guess would be standoff weaponry.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that disaster, as you said, at the end of the 70s, 1980. Many people say that that's what cost Jimmy Carter the election in 1980. I'm sure that that will be also in the minds of the people around Donald Trump. Let me ask you about Saudi Arabia. On Tuesday, the Saudis said that they will not allow their airspace or their territory to be used for any military actions against Iran. So would the United States be able to strike Iran without Saudi support?
Yes, but it makes it more complicated, and it may explain some of the delay. Or this delay could be essentially a negotiating tool, with Trump trying to create the specter of a forthcoming strike in order to put pressure on the Iranians to do a deal. But, we have other places where we have U.S. military access in the broader region. I think most countries will be wary of giving us permission to use their bases for this kind of a strike. But we also have aircraft carriers and we have stealth bombers. So depending on the target set and the, depth and range of that target set, I think we could probably do a number of things without any kind of allied help. Again, to what end, you have to ask, because I'm not sure what's still left of the Iranian nuclear program. I'm not sure how good our intelligence is about where any residual capabilities are. And I'm not sure how many Iranian leaders you're going to manage to kill with airstrikes. But I think we do have options in any event.
We do have options, and we would think that the Americans have friends in the Middle East, and yet you've got the Saudis saying you can't use our airspace, and they're saying that despite the fact that President Trump has designated Saudi Arabia as a major non-NATO ally of the United States. Are the Saudis, are they fair weather friends for the Americans?
No, I think they're exercising their own sovereign right to make decisions about how their territory is employed. And they've got to live next to Iran forever. So it's understandable they would have a more complex calculus. I would remind you, I'm sure you recall, many European countries have denied the United States airspace in past complicated missions where there were controversies over whether it should have been carried out in the first place. For example, the attack in 1986 in Libya against Gaddafi because of the previous bombing on German soil, I believe, of a discotheque where two Americans had been killed the year before. So those are the kind of calculations that every sovereign country's got to make for itself. And I don't think the United States should be indignant if the Saudis make a call that we don't like.
If the U.S. does decide to strike Iran, it will almost definitely be able to count on Israeli support. What other regional powers do you think are likely to be involved?
It's a great question. It's going to depend on the nature of the operation and how it's described in advance. I don't think any country is going to be all that anxious to antagonize Iran just because the Americans feel like striking. So I think there'll have to be discussion of the options, the target set, the duration of the campaign, the post-campaign diplomatic strategy. And, if all those things look reasonable, then it's possible that a country like Jordan could.
President Trump is ramping up his threats against Iran. The president wrote in part on Truth Social this morning, quote, hopefully Iran will quickly come to the table and negotiate a fair and equitable deal. No nuclear weapons. He goes on to say, as I told Iran once before, make a deal. They didn't, and there was Operation Midnight Hammer, a major destruction of Iran. The next attack will be far worse. Last night at an event in Iowa, the president reminded the crowd that the U.S. military is prepared to act.
And by the way, there's another beautiful armada floating beautifully toward Iran right now. So we'll see. I hope they make a deal.
Iran's mission to the UN responded on X. Iran stands ready for dialogue based on mutual respect and interest, but if pushed, it will defend itself and respond like never before.
Now, the big assumption is that they actually are starting to actually enrich uranium to a certain level, because the plutonium that they or the uranium that they actually moved, that Russia helped them move. I believe that Russia's actually supplying them back with that, so they can make I'm sorry, so they can actually, sorry, I was reading. So they can actually make other mini explosives, so they can actually move them in to other spaces. I've been doing a lot of research, and they got a lot of planes going in and out of Iran from out Russia and stuff. So, yeah, I'll let y'all continue.
CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us now. So, Charlie, so many exclamation points between world leaders online after the attack in June. President Trump said Iran's nuclear facilities were obliterated. Now he says they need a deal. What's the status of their program?
Yeah, Lindsay, that's the word, right? Obliterated. We heard it time and again. It came from the defense secretary. It came from Joint Chiefs of Staff. It came from the president himself. Very specific word there. Not obliterated, because there was a lot of damage done to Iran's nuclear facilities. That's an understatement. You know, the B-2 bombers with these massive ordnance penetrators did a lot of damage to one or two of the main nuclear sites in Iran. But it is the case of the Iranians and the Iranian regime that as soon as the dust settles, literally and metaphorically, they're rebuilding again. And there's also a question of enriched uranium, which the United States and most intelligence analysts haven't quite determined where that was. A lot of it had been moved. There are other underground facilities, and the Iranians are pursuant of a nuclear weapon. And when the Israelis and the Americans attack Iran's nuclear facilities, either overtly or covertly, whether bombing it or taking out nuclear scientists or trying to get to the technology, it's always done in a measure of how far back has the program been pushed. So after the Operation Midnight Hammer over last summer, they believe it was probably 12 to 18 months. Judging from where they would be to attaining a nuclear weapon and the delivery platform to fire that nuclear weapon. So that is what it is. So they're still pursuant of a nuclear weapon. It's been pushed back, but the Trump administration continues to push and push and push the Iranian regime to give up their aspirations for attaining a nuclear weapon.
Based on your pulse check of the situation, how imminent does American action seem to be?
Well, Lindsay, so for the past few days, we've been monitoring the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier. It's called a carrier strike group. So it's not just the carrier itself with 4 squadrons of F-18 fighter jets, but it's got 3 missile-guided destroyers that are headed there. So as of, I think it was about 48 hours ago, it crossed into that, what the military calls CENTCOM, or Central Command. That is the region that includes Iran. So it is within striking distance. I was trying to do the math this morning. Travels at about 30 knots. When I asked officials today, I said, is it on station, as they say? Is it ready to fire, as it were? And they said, well, that's making an assumption on exactly where it's going. And I was told, when it shows up, you'll know about it. So it's got 3 destroyers with it. It's got cruise missiles. There are 3 destroyers that are already there. But when he said a great, beautiful armada, and he said this is even bigger than what we saw in Venezuela, it's not a fraction of that. But there is plenty of firepower within reach of Iran as we speak.
All right, Charlie Daggett, thank you.
Why is the American attack on Iran being delayed? Reports indicate that President Trump received astonishing intelligence information about Iran just this week that could be affecting his decisions. However, the United States military is already launching a large-scale exercise, perhaps a dress rehearsal for strikes, while Iran unveiled a drone carrier, and the goal of the Revolutionary Guards is coming into view, to turn the fighting into a multi-front crisis, as everyone in the Middle East is prepared for an all-out war. And meanwhile, Tehran is trying its luck with psychological warfare against the United States, threatening American carriers as other countries announce that they are closing their airspace and the territorial waters for an attack on Iran. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. So I return to the question that is occupying everyone. Why is the American attack on Iran being delayed? Today, TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us a closer look at why it seems that the American strike on Iran is being delayed. It's not because of military limitations, but because of fear of a broad regional ignition, the strengthening of the Revolutionary Guards as a dominant governing factor, and of severe damage to the stability of the energy and also the global economy markets. And meanwhile, this week, United States Central Command announced an operational readiness exercise in which forces will deploy to emergency sites with the approval of the host countries. For their part, Iran published footage of a drone carrier deployed and ready to respond to any attack. Is the footage real? Is it fake? Or is it AI created? We'll take a closer look. And meanwhile, Turkey is preparing for the possibility of a wave of migrants from Iran declaring their intention to establish a buffer zone. Elsewhere, United States President Donald Trump declared that there is a fleet on its way to Iran. I hope they make a deal. That's what he said. At the same time, the Saudi Crown Prince joined the United Arab Emirates and said that the Saudis will not allow the use of the territory for an attack. In Baghdad, Iraq, volunteers, so to speak, are signing up for a pro-Iranian militia to fight together with Tehran. Also, Iran is escalating the threats towards the United States through a video that simulates attacking aircraft carriers using artificial intelligence, alongside the additional footage under the headline, "A Message to the Aircraft Carrier Lincoln." In Beijing, they were alarmed enough by the recent events to send several cargo planes full with ammunition and supplies to their ally in Iran. Senior officials in the Quds forces of the Revolutionary Guards also held meetings this week with leaders of the Axis of Resistance ahead of a potential American strike. According to the report, the Iranians are trying to confuse the United States and open additional fronts in the event of a war, but Hezbollah will join the fighting only if the American strikes go beyond limited blows. And meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, they continue to Phase B. Phase B of the ceasefire plan, and the United States is expected to announce a deadline for Hamas to disarm of its weapons already in the coming days. This is in order to define the process in advance and start rehabilitating Gaza. In addition, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will hold a limited discussion on Thursday with senior security officials, with the focus of the discussion being Gaza and the new arrangements inside the Gaza Strip. From the other side comes a report that the terrorist organization Hamas is spreading promises across the Gaza Strip, a promise that should worry Israel, including a refusal to disarm and a statement that the weapons in our hands are vital for defense against the occupation. In addition, Hamas is acting to integrate its approximately 10,000 police officers into the new management mechanism of the Gaza Strip, supported by the United States in a letter that Hamas published. It urged its employees in Gaza to cooperate with the committee and promised them that it is working to integrate them into the future government, basically giving them jobs in the future. Hamas members. Elsewhere, IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir yesterday approved the plan for a large-scale attack in areas where the IDF has not yet operated inside the Gaza Strip, with the goal of defeating Hamas. In the security establishment, three options are being examined, from a political agreement on the timetable set by the Trump administration, through a limited military move, and up to full conquest and the establishment of a temporary military government. Today, we will understand together what is on the table. And finally, this week, we mark the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Many events were held to commemorate this day, including the publication of the 2025 Anti-Semitism Report of the World Zionist Organization, which revealed that anti-Semitism has become institutionalized and has even undergone normalization in many countries. And during the first 8 months of 2025, there was an increase of about 10% in anti-Semitic incidents, and 20 Jewish people lost their lives in anti-Semitic attacks. So we have a lot to talk about today. So let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and this is your Boots on the Ground report, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel on day 844 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shiite militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are taking their orders from the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth by pressing the share button and sending our content to as many people as possible. And of course, hit that subscribe button so that you stay tuned to what's happening in Israel, boots on the ground style. We start today's report with a look at the United States military's large-scale aerial exercise, which is currently on its way in the Middle East. It includes training missions for fighter jets, aerial refueling aircraft carriers and ships, also land-based radar installations, and much more. It is meant to simulate the dispersing of aircrafts to the emergency points in several countries in the Middle East to demonstrate the ability to sustain combat air power fast, far, and under demanding conditions. This is not an exercise on paper or even on the computer. This is a message of readiness. And alongside the exercise, the American force around Iran is growing and thickening. And that changes the rules of the game for all the sides. In the maritime arena, an American aircraft carrier and its escorting warships are already in this region. They're tightening the maritime noose around Iran. The battle group presents a simple message. If necessary, the United States wants an immediate response capability. And speaking of response, Iran is not waiting for explanations. According to intelligence reports coming from Gulf states, Iran deployed units of the Revolutionary Guards along its southern coast, equipped with anti-ship missiles, especially around the Strait of Hormuz and in the Gulf area. There is a focus on strategic points like Qasem Island and Bandar Abbas, and the logic is clear: to show they are ready to block the movement, threaten vessels, and turn any American approach into a dangerous story. But this is also an exercise in psychological warfare. Channels identified with the Revolutionary Guards circulated a video this week that simulates an attack on American aircraft carriers using artificial intelligence. At the same time, additional footage was distributed under the headline of a message to the American aircraft carrier that included fast boats in action and the launch of cruise missiles, as if it were a live demonstration projecting the message that we are waiting for you. Along that same line, footage was shown of an Iranian drone carrier with drones deployed and ready to respond to any attack, while the assistant commander of the Revolutionary Guards Navy for Political Affairs, Muhammad Akbarzadeh, threatened that there are capabilities that will be revealed in due time. He also directly linked the security of the Strait of Hormuz to decisions in Tehran. The message to neighboring countries is that if their territory, airspace, or maritime space is used against Iran, they will be considered hostile. This is already affecting countries all around this region. Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis conveyed a message this week that they will not allow the use of their territory for an attack on Iran, and everyone understands what could happen the day after. And meanwhile, the IRGC's proxies are also entering the frame. In Iraq, a pro-Iranian militia called to prepare for an all-out war and announced it would support Iran in every possible way. Volunteers were documented arriving in Baghdad, signaling documents, and committing to defend Iran. They are trying to project strategic depth. Not only Iran will fight, but the entire axis will be activated. What do you think about all of this? Should America and Israel be intimidated by Iran's AI videos and stories about volunteers arriving in Baghdad and pleading to defend Iran? Was it smart for Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to forbid America from using their airspace and their territorial waters for an attack on Iran? What should America's other allies in this region do? Let me know what you think in the comments section. And meanwhile, President Trump spoke about an armada making its way towards Iran and expressed hope that they will make a deal. At the same time, he also threatened Iraq, saying that if Nouri el-Maliki returns to the role of Prime Minister, the United States will no longer help them. This is a way of telling Baghdad, don't let Iran pull you in. And while all of this is happening outside, within Iran, the regime is busy with repression. This week, they broadcasted forced confessions of detainees on state television. Hundreds of cases were reported, including staged interrogations, some of which apparently came after torture. There were also reports of thousands detained in the last wave of protests, an accumulated figure of more than 41,000 detainees. There are also reports of raids in hospitals with wounded protesters taken.
president, over the last few minutes, has now confirmed. We have a big flotilla going towards Iran, a massive, huge group of forces heading towards that direction. And he did say that I'd rather not use it, but we'll see. Hopefully we won't have to use it, but we'll see. Obviously indicating that there will be one final offer, one final phone call to the leadership in Tehran. Let's go to the first one when he said that we have a big flotilla going in that direction and we'll see what happens. We have a big force going towards Iran. I'd rather not see anything happen, but we are watching them very closely.
With Iran, the U.S. has got sizable military assets. You know, we have a lot of ships going that direction, just in case. We have a big flotilla going in that direction, and we'll see what happens. We have a big force going toward Iran. I'd rather not see anything happen, but we're watching them very closely.
A few minutes later, he was asked a similar question again. Journalists do that usually to make sure that if they can get him to say something else, especially kind of spontaneously, but he just repeated almost the same thing, saying we have an armada. We have a massive, basically, forces heading in that direction. But their president, over
U.S. Navy warship, this is Safran Navy on channel 16, over.
This is Coalition warship. I'm engaged in transit passage in accordance with international law, over.
U.S. Navy warship, this is Safran Navy station. Your helicopter is in vicinity of my vessels and Hengam oilfield also. Sometimes going to Iranian territorial waters, advise you to take them on your board and do not enter in Iranian territorial waters. If you do not obey my orders, we will open fire on your helicopters, over.
y'all. So I'm gonna try to see about wherever the aircraft carrier is, and then I'm gonna jump back on and let y'all know. If I don't find it tonight, I'll be back on tomorrow morning. Hope you have a good night. If I don't talk to y'all tonight, I'll see y'all tomorrow. Thank y'all for the subscribers. Thank y'all for the 2 new subscribers that just joined. Really appreciate it. I hope y'all have a wonderful night.